stories beyond imagination.
Will their bond be enough to withstand the frost?
The mountain range was unforgiving in winter. Blizzards rolled down from the peaks like raging beasts, devouring all warmth and drowning every sound beneath howling winds. Ethan was no stranger to such nights. As a seasoned mountaineer and survivalist, he had spent years in solitude, living in a wooden cabin tucked away deep in the wilderness. On this particular night, however, the silence of the forest broke with something that stirred his instincts. While he was gathering extra logs for his fire, his ears caught the faintest sound, a cry, fragile and alien, drifting through the storm. It wasn't the cry of any animal he knew. It was high-pitched, trembling, and carried a strange harmony, as if two voices were layered over each other. Against his better judgment, Ethan's heart urged him to investigate. He strapped his lantern to his belt, tightened his coat, and trudged into the storm, each step sinking into the heavy snow. The world beyond the trees felt hostile, a place where no human should linger long. Yet the call grew clearer, tugging at him like invisible strings. After nearly 30 minutes of battling the blizzard, Ethan stumbled upon a hollow carved into the side of a snowbank. There, illuminated by the glow of his lantern, he saw them, two figures curled against each other, trembling violently in the cold. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks. Two young women, barely clothed, their hair shimmering silver in the lamplight. But as he crouched closer, details shattered his illusion. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lantern light like stars trapped in crystal. Their ears tapered to delicate points, and their skin emitted a subtle luminescence, as though tiny threads of starlight ran beneath their flesh. They looked fragile, on the verge of death, yet otherworldly in their beauty. One of them stirred and opened her mouth. A stream of words flowed out, melodic, rhythmic, unlike any language Ethan had ever heard. He couldn't understand, but the desperation in her tone was universal. She was pleading. Ethan didn't hesitate. He removed his coat, wrapped them both inside, and hefted them over his shoulders. Their weight was surprisingly light, like carrying bundles of feathers. With the storm clawing at his back, he pushed toward his cabin, every instinct screaming that these girls were not from this earth. Inside the cabin, warmth embraced them like a guardian. Ethan laid the sisters near the fireplace, piling blankets around them and stoking the fire until it roared. Their skin was ice-cold to the touch, but slowly, faint warmth began to seep back into them. Ethan brewed hot broth and pressed the cups to their lips, guiding them to sip. They drank hesitantly, their glowing eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear and gratitude. He couldn't help but notice the subtle differences between them. The older one, judging by her poise, had sharp, commanding eyes, icy blue, intense even in weakness. The younger's gaze was softer, her features rounder, almost childlike despite her ethereal beauty. They clung to each other tightly, whispering in their strange tongue, their voices weaving a song-like pattern. Ethan sat across from them, rubbing his arms, mind racing. Who were they? Lost hikers in strange costumes? No, that glow, that unearthly aura, it was undeniable. He was staring at beings not of this world. The weight of that realization pressed on him, but he pushed it aside. For now, they were freezing, helpless girls in need of his help. The questions could wait until morning. As the storm raged outside, Ethan dozed lightly in his chair. But the sound of soft movement stirred him awake. The two sisters were now sitting upright, wrapped in his blankets, their eyes scanning the cabin with curiosity. They touched objects, a kettle, a carved wooden bowl, the iron stove, as though studying artifacts from an alien culture. The younger one giggled softly at the feel of his woolen blanket, rubbing it against her cheek. The elder, however, remained cautious. She met Ethan's gaze directly, her expression unreadable. Then with halting effort, she spoke. Man. The word was broken but clear. Ethan leaned forward, startled. Yes, he said slowly, pressing a hand to his chest. Human, my name is Ethan. The elder repeated it, testing the word as though it were fragile. E-than. Her accent turned it into something musical. The younger one tried too, mispronouncing it with a laugh, then pointing to herself. Lira. she said. The elder followed. Seris. Ethan blinked. They had just introduced themselves. For the first time, connection bridged the gulf between their worlds. Over the following hours, Ethan pieced together fragments of their story through broken words, gestures, and instinct. The sisters, Seris and Lira, were not wanderers of Earth, but travelers from the stars. Their ship had crashed somewhere beyond the mountains, torn apart by forces Ethan could hardly comprehend. They had been wandering the frozen wilderness for days, weakened by hunger and exposure. Lira often clutched a pendant around her neck, a small crystal that pulsed faintly with light, as though it were alive. Seris guarded her fiercely, always placing herself between Ethan and her younger sister. Despite their alien origin, their emotions were unmistakably human. Fear, exhaustion, hope. Ethan listened, his heart aching at their plight. He knew what loneliness felt like, what it meant to be stranded with no one to turn to. In their eyes, he saw both vulnerability and resilience. As dawn painted the sky pale gold beyond the storm, Ethan made a silent vow. He would protect them no matter what. They had crossed the stars and fallen into his world. Now, by fate or chance, they were his responsibility, and perhaps his salvation from the solitude that had long haunted his soul. The days that followed felt surreal to Ethan. He had grown used to the silence of his solitary cabin, the steady rhythm of chopping wood, hunting game, and fixing tools. But with Seris and Lira around, that silence shattered into a symphony of whispers, laughter, and questions. Though their grasp of English was rough, they were quick learners. Lira, especially, absorbed words like a sponge, her curious nature driving her to point at every object and demand its name. Chair, table, fire, sky. Each word she repeated with delight, as though it were a treasure. Seris, on the other hand, was more reserved. She spoke less but observed more, her sharp gaze never missing the smallest detail of Ethan's routines. Sometimes Ethan would catch her watching him closely as he chopped wood or cooked, her expression unreadable. Was it distrust or something else? Either way, Ethan felt their presence fill the emptiness he hadn't realized weighed so heavily on him. The cabin was no longer just wood and stone. It was alive with energy. One morning, Ethan discovered just how extraordinary his guests truly were. While he was preparing breakfast, he heard a soft hum behind him. Turning, he saw Lira holding her pendant, the crystal glowing brightly in her palm. As she hummed, the broken chair leg he had set aside the night before began to mend itself. Wood fibers twisted, bent, and fused back together until the chair stood whole. Ethan's jaw dropped. Lira giggled, clapping her hands, then pointed proudly at her work. Seris, however, quickly hushed her, scolding in their alien tongue. Ethan realized that while Lira trusted him fully, Seris wanted to keep their powers hidden. Still, the truth was undeniable. These were not just alien wanderers. They possessed abilities far beyond human comprehension. Ethan tried to ask how it worked, but the sisters only exchanged glances and shook their heads. Some secrets, it seemed, were too dangerous to share. That night, as the fire crackled and snow drifted softly outside, the sisters told Ethan more about their world. With broken words and hand gestures, they described tall silver cities under twin suns, where rivers of light flowed through the air like streams. They spoke of their people, the Elari, who lived in harmony with the energy of the cosmos. But when Ethan asked how they had come to Earth, Seris's face darkened. She spoke of a pursuer, a shadow that had attacked their vessel. The words were fragmented, but the fear in her voice was clear. Someone or something had driven them to this planet, and it might not be far behind. Ethan felt a chill unrelated to the weather. If what they feared came here, his quiet mountain might soon become a battlefield. Yet as Lira rested her head against his shoulder, trusting him without hesitation, he realized he couldn't turn them away. Despite the looming danger, a strange bond began to form. Lira was openly affectionate, often holding Ethan's hand as though it anchored her to this strange world. She laughed easily, her joy infectious, and her innocence melted the cold weight of loneliness Ethan had carried for years. Seris, however, was different. Where Lira offered warmth, Seris offered strength. She helped Ethan with chores, learned his methods, and even improved them with quiet suggestions. One evening, as they gathered wood, Seris paused and placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Strong," she said, her voice steady, her eyes locking with his. It was a simple word, but it carried layers of meaning. Ethan realized both sisters looked to him in different ways. Lira for comfort, Seris for stability, and slowly they began to look at him, not just as a savior, but as something more. The tension revealed itself one quiet evening. Ethan had just finished preparing stew when Lira leaned across the table, eyes sparkling. "Ethan, wife?" she asked, tapping her chest, then pointing at him. Ethan nearly choked on his food. Before he could respond, Seris snapped something sharp in their tongue, glaring at her younger sister. Lira pouted but clung to Ethan's arm anyway, giggling. Ethan stammered, unsure how to respond. But Seris's silence was louder than words. Later that night, when Lira slept curled in blankets, Seris confronted him. "She young," she said haltingly. "Not child, but heart fast." Her gaze softened, though. "But me, too." Ethan froze. The meaning was clear. Both sisters had begun to see him as more than just their rescuer. His world, once filled only with the sound of wind and fire, was now tangled in feelings he hadn't expected. Two alien sisters, bound by love for each other, now competing for a place in his heart. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. The storm had passed, leaving the cabin wrapped in silence. But his mind churned louder than any blizzard. Seris's words echoed in his head. She was older, wiser, protective of her sister, yet she, too, had feelings for him. Ethan sat by the dying embers of the fire, staring into the glow as questions tormented him. How could he, a simple human, stand between two sisters who had crossed the stars together? How could he choose between them without shattering the bond they shared? Yet denying their feelings seemed impossible. Lyra's innocent affection and Seris's steady strength had both taken root in his heart. He rubbed his temples, realizing the cabin that once felt too large for him now suddenly felt far too small. The warmth of companionship had awakened, something he hadn't felt in years, the ache of love. And the burden of choice? The following morning brought no peace. As Ethan chopped wood outside, Lira bounded toward him, her laughter ringing like bells. She snatched one of the logs and tried to mimic his movements, swinging the axe with clumsy enthusiasm. Ethan chuckled and gently corrected her stance, guiding her hands. She beamed at him, leaning close, and whispered softly, "Good. Husband!" Before he could reply, Seris appeared in the doorway, her gaze sharp as ice. Lira stuck out her tongue playfully at her sister. But Ethan felt the weight of Seris's unspoken words. Later, when he returned inside, Seris confronted him again. "She play, but love real," she said firmly, then touched her own chest. "Me, too." Ethan's throat tightened. They weren't joking or confused, they were serious. The sisters, stranded and alone in a hostile world, had anchored their hearts to him. And whether he liked it or not, he had become the center of their universe. But just as emotions reached their breaking point, danger announced itself. One afternoon, Ethan noticed strange markings in the snow near the tree line, deep impressions, unlike any animal tracks he knew. That night, the sisters grew restless, speaking urgently in their own tongue. Seris explained in broken English, "They come." Ethan's blood ran cold. The pursuers who had attacked their ship were near. He asked what they wanted, but Seris only shook her head, fear flickering in her usually steady eyes. "Take us, kill you." The weight of her words pressed heavily on him. His quiet cabin in the mountains was no longer safe. He looked at the sisters, both staring at him with trust and fear, and he made a silent vow. If their enemies came, he would stand between them and danger, even if it cost him his life. Preparations began immediately. Ethan secured the cabin, reinforced doors and windows, and laid traps in the snow. The sisters helped in their own ways. Seris used her knowledge of energy manipulation to strengthen the wooden beams, weaving faint threads of light that hummed softly in the dark. Lira, though less skilled, placed her glowing pendant on the threshold, claiming it would hide them from detection. Ethan had no way to know if it would work, but he trusted her earnest eyes. For the first time, the three of them worked as a family, each contributing, each relying on the other. That night, as they sat by the fire after their preparations, Lira nestled against his side, whispering, "Safe, with you." Seris didn't speak, but she sat closer than usual, her hand brushing his briefly. Ethan realized that beyond romance, beyond survival, they had forged something deeper, a bond built in fire, snow, and trust. The attack came sooner than expected. At dawn, a low hum reverberated across the valley, shaking snow from the trees. Ethan rushed outside, heart pounding, and saw lights weaving in the sky. Dark, angular shapes descending silently like predators. The sisters stood at his side, their expressions grim. "Hunters," Seris muttered, gripping his arm tightly. Ethan felt the weight of a rifle in his hands, though he knew human weapons might be useless against such foes. Yet when he looked at Seris and Lira, he saw no fear directed at him, only faith. They believed he could protect them. That belief gave him strength. As the alien ships descended closer, casting shadows over the snow, Ethan tightened his grip and whispered to himself, "They'll have to go through me first." The battle for their future was about to begin. The first blast tore through the trees like thunder, sending shards of ice and wood into the air. Ethan ducked instinctively, pulling Lira behind him while Seris raised her hands, threads of light crackling at her fingertips. Dark, insect-like figures emerged from the tree line, tall, armored creatures with glowing red eyes and weapons humming with alien energy. Ethan's rifle felt like a toy in comparison, but he fired anyway, the crack of the shot echoing across the valley. One of the hunters staggered back, more surprised than harmed, and Seris seized the moment. She thrust her hands forward, releasing a wave of shimmering energy that flung two of them into the snow. "Go!" she shouted at Ethan, her broken English laced with urgency. But Ethan refused to run. He planted his feet firmly in front of the cabin. This was his home, and those were his sisters now, blood or not. The hunters advanced in formation, their weapons glowing brighter. Lira clutched her pendant, whispering words Ethan couldn't understand. Suddenly, the crystal flared, casting a protective dome of light around them. Blasts struck the barrier, rippling it like water but failing to break through. Lira gasped with the effort, sweat beading her forehead. Ethan realized the shield drained her strength quickly. He fired again, picking off another hunter, but there were too many. The snow seemed alive with shadows, dozens more figures circling. Seris gritted her teeth, raising another wave of energy, but the strain was visible in her trembling arms. For every foe they felled, two more took its place. Ethan's heart pounded. They couldn't hold out forever. Yet even in the chaos, he caught Lira looking at him through the glow of her shield, her lips forming silent words. "Stay with us." Just as hope began to crumble, something unexpected happened. The pendant in Lira's hands pulsed violently, as though responding to her desperation. The shield expanded outward in a sudden surge, slamming into the hunters and scattering them across the snow. Some screamed in alien tongues as their armor cracked, while others retreated into the shadows of the forest. But the victory came at a cost. Lira collapsed, her body limp, the pendant dimming as if drained. Ethan dropped his rifle and caught her, panic searing through him. "Lira, stay with me!" Her eyes fluttered weakly, a faint smile curving her lips. "Safe, Ethan," she whispered before slipping unconscious. Seris fell to her knees beside them, her usual strength breaking into raw fear. For the first time, Ethan saw not the warrior but the sister, the woman who was terrified of losing her other half. He tightened his grip on Lira and swore through clenched teeth. "No one takes them from me! No one!" The hunters regrouped at the tree line, their leader stepping forward. Taller than the rest, cloaked in jagged black armor, it raised a weapon that glowed with lethal energy. Seris's eyes hardened as she rose, fury igniting around her. "Stay," she ordered Ethan, placing herself between him and the advancing foe. But Ethan couldn't obey. He laid Lira gently by the cabin door, grabbed his rifle, and moved to stand at Seris's side. She looked at him in disbelief. Then something softened in her eyes, acceptance. Together, they faced the leader as it raised its weapon. At the last second, Seris clasped Ethan's hand, channeling her energy through him. His rifle glowed, humming with alien power. When he pulled the trigger, the bullet streaked like a comet, tearing through the leader's armor in a blinding explosion. The beast collapsed, and the rest of the hunters screeched before retreating into the woods. Silence fell, broken only by Ethan's ragged breaths, and the soft crackle of the fire inside the cabin. When the battle ended, Ethan stumbled back inside, carrying Lira in his arms while Seris followed close behind. He laid Lira gently on the bed, watching as her chest rose and fell faintly. Seris placed her hands over her sister, weaving delicate streams of light into her body, stabilizing her. Hours passed before Lira stirred, her eyes opening slowly. Relief crashed over Ethan like a wave, and he gripped her hand tightly. She smiled weakly. "Told you, safe." Seris sat beside them, exhaustion etched into her face, but her hand found Ethan's shoulder. For a long moment, the three of them sat in silence, bound together by survival, sacrifice, and something deeper. The danger wasn't over. Ethan knew the hunters might return, but in that moment, the cabin felt like the safest place in the universe. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel alone. He had family and perhaps something even stronger. In the days that followed, the cabin became both a sanctuary and a crossroads. The snow outside still whispered of danger, but inside, warmth bloomed. Ethan repaired what the battle had damaged, while Seris and Lira slowly regained their strength. Yet the question lingered in the air like smoke. What next? The sisters could not stay hidden forever. Their enemies would not give up so easily. At night, Ethan often found Seris gazing at the stars, her expression caught between longing and sorrow. "Home, gone," she murmured once, her voice breaking. "Only us, only you." Lira, meanwhile, clung closer to him every day, as though afraid he might vanish. The truth settled in Ethan's chest like a heavy stone. These two had lost everything, and now he was all they had. That knowledge was both a blessing and a burden. One evening, as the firelight painted the cabin in gold, Seris finally spoke the words Ethan had been dreading. "Choose," she said softly, her accent still rough, but her meaning sharp. Lira looked up from where she sat curled against Ethan's side, her glowing eyes wide and pleading. Ethan's heart clenched. How could he choose between them without tearing them apart? They had survived together, fought together, and shared a bond no human could understand. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "I don't want to hurt either of you," he admitted. Seris tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. Hurt is life, but truth, stronger. Lira's lip trembled, but she nodded as though accepting the challenge. For the first time, both sisters demanded not just his protection, but his heart. That night, Ethan wrestled with the decision. He walked outside into the snow, staring at the vast expanse of stars. The silence pressed on him, but so did the weight of his emotions. Lira's laughter, her innocence, her warmth. They had healed his loneliness like sunlight breaking through clouds. Seris's strength, her wisdom, her fire. They had challenged him, made him stronger, made him believe he was more than just a recluse in the mountains. Two halves of the same soul, and both bound to him. Ethan closed his eyes, the cold biting his skin, and whispered to the night, "I can't choose. I love them both." It was the truth, raw and terrifying, and somehow he sensed the stars above already knew. When he returned to the cabin, both sisters were awake, waiting. He sat before them, his breath heavy, and confessed, "I can't choose between you. Lira, you bring me joy. Seris, you give me strength. You are different, but together, you are whole. Without one, the other breaks. And without you both, His voice faltered. "I'm nothing." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Lira crawled forward, her small hands clutching his. "Together," she said softly. Seris's eyes glistened, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over theirs. "Together," she agreed, her voice firm. In that moment, something unspoken but undeniable bound them all. Not one heart, but three, woven by survival, love, and choice.